Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
We have been talking about Hasidism on prayer. We're jumping in the middle, so if you haven't been with us, you may need to go back and watch some stuff. And 2 weeks in a row, we've gotten I promised we're going to talk about distractions. And we got distracted, but this time we'll not get distracted. We're going to talk about distractions in prayer, what they mean, and what to do about them. Again, Larry asked about your iPhone distractions, to which the answer is no, the Hasidim don't really deal with what to do about your iPhone distractions. I think their answer would be put it in your tallis bag and zip up your tallis bag and put it on silent. I think that's what they would say about iPhone distractions. Hasidim the Hasidim are very concerned about what to do about internal distractions. They frame internal distractions as machshavot zarot, alien thoughts or intrusive thoughts, machshavot zarot. A lot of times when they talk about that, both the Kabbalah and Hasidut, they're talking about sexual thoughts. They're really hung up about distracting sexual thoughts. What we're going to look at today, I think, is not particularly about that. But I do want to tell you that I may be giving you kind of an unrepresentative view. A lot of time what they're hung up on is your men being distracted by sex thoughts in shul. Because there's a lot of emphasis in the Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, medieval Jewish mysticism, on correct sexuality, by which, of course, they mean correct male sexuality, because that's who's writing it and that's who they're talking to, right? Correct male sexuality and incorrect male sexuality. They're totally hung up on sexual fantasies are bad and masturbation is bad, and it's a big hang up they have. Ad hayom hazeh, as it says in the Bible, until the present day. So very often when they talk about alien thoughts, intrusive thoughts, they mean about that. Today we're going to look at passages that are not particularly about that. Okay? So no more distractions before we talk about distracting thoughts. I'm going to try to screen share. This is the same handout as last week. Last week we spoke at length, the first part of this, which was what to do about routine, right? And we talked about why prayer becomes routine. The verse in Psalms, Al tashlichenu la'et zikna, don't throw me out, God, when I'm old, means not the superficial, obvious meaning of the verse, but it means don't let my prayers get old, and what we're supposed to do to not have our prayers get old and rote. We talked about that at some length, and that was our distraction. That's why we didn't get to what to do about distracting thoughts. Okay, what to do about distracting thoughts. This is going to start a little bit dense, a little bit in the weeds, and then we'll try to make it simpler. And I realize there are passages in the Baal Shem Tov about this that I've studied that are even simpler, and clearer, which are unfortunately not in the handout. So we're going to read, I think, 2 different kinds of things, and then I'll really simplify it for you in the third thing, which we don't have a text of. 92, paragraph 92, in this version of the Baal Shem Tov's treatise on prayer, the Amud HaTfilah. And if you are looking at the handout at home, it's on the first page, the second page, the fourth page. The individual has many potential ways of being, and some worlds require one way and other worlds require another. This in order that one's soul ascend to all the worlds that it needs to, right? So this refers to Kabbalistic thinking that there are 4 worlds. Before Kabbalistic thinking of 4 worlds, there were 7 heavens in early mystical thinking. And the idea is as you're praying, your soul should, it's the goal, ascend through these upper worlds. Don't worry about it too much. One is examined in each world to see if he or she is worthy of ascending. And if one is unworthy, one is ousted. So you try to get more elevated, and if you're unworthy, they kick you out. Sometimes one is sent a foreign thought, that's this technical term, one of the machshavot zarot, literally means foreign thought, alien thought, okay? I think contemporarily we would think of it as intrusive thought, in order to cause the removal, meaning you're ascending to a higher level of spirituality. You have an intrusive thought, which knocks you off target. Just think about this as like, if you've ever tried to do meditation and you get, clear your mind or whatever, or think about this and not that, and you get an intrusive thought. What am I going to have for dinner? Or is that check going to bounce? Or all the variety of intrusive thoughts that we all get throughout the course of the day. But if someone is wise, he or she can, by means of this foreign thought, bind even more intensely to the blessed name. This is kind of the heart of what they're talking about with distraction, which is, I'm going to say it in simpler terms, you can use the intrusive thought as a vehicle to the divine. That's the bottom line. They're going to go and amplify this, but if I could just foreshadow and bottom line it for you, it's about, rather than saying, oh no, I've been davening and I got distracted, I messed it up, I got to kick that thought out. It's the goal is, how can I use that intrusive thought? How can I use that intrusive thought? Okay, I'll say it simply. And then again, because prayer is a spiritual practice, how can I use that intrusive thought to deepen my prayer? That's the goal. Now they have this Lurianic, we talked about phase 2 of medieval Kabbalah, Isaac Luria, about the letters and the vessels. So I'm going to read through it just for the sake of completeness, but we're not going to get hung up on it because it's not really what our practice is for most of us. So how do you use this foreign thought, or why should you use this intrusive thought? This is because the letters are the limbs of the divine presence, but they fell into the obscuring shells due to the cosmic breaking of the vessels. If you remember Luria's thought about the sparks of divine light, the vessels couldn't hold them, they broke, and so they fell down to this world and they got covered with schmutz. And as a result, the letters underwent unseemly combinations. Also remember the idea that the letters are like the elements of the universe. We can compare this, I love this analogy, we can compare this to a person who serves delicacies that are mixed up in unsuitable ways. Each delicacy is good in and of itself, but when they are combined in unfitting ways, they become despicable and unseemly. You're making a pasta sauce and you put in smoked paprika and saffron and pickle juice and I don't know, some fourth thing that I can't think of. And each one of those would be a good flavor, but you mix them up. And so you say, yuck. They're all individually actually good flavors. So the intrusive thought is like the letters, which are the elements of the universe, which got scrambled into gibberish. Thus, when a person understands the underlying nature of a particular thought, she or he realizes that if it's in the nature, now pay attention, she or he realizes that if it be in the nature of desire, which is generally their code for sexual thoughts, it fell from the world of desire. If it be of an evil type of fear, it fell from the world of fear. And if it be of overweening pride, then it fell from the world of beauty, and so on. All these thoughts fell from the 7 days of cosmic creation. And when one connects these thoughts with the blessed name through the love and awe of the Creator, I'm going to get back to that, one is returning them to their original roots. And so it is with other attributes. Each thought becomes rectified in accordance with the return of the fallen attribute to its holy origin. The shells fall away and a positive combination of letters remain. Okay. Actually, I do want to add this. Yeah. The next to last line on that page, the blessed name derives great pleasure from this meaning when we do this, for it may be likened. I'm going to explain again what this is. And again, we're going to say it again in a variety of different ways. This means that I am recognizing that my intrusive thought, which I experience as it intrudes on my spiritual experience that I'm trying to have in prayer, I need to recognize that my intrusive thought actually comes from a sacred place. I need to recognize what the sacred place is, it refers to it as its original root, okay? And then I can use that sacred thought or appreciate that sacred thought as it actually connects me to God. Let me pause for a moment. This is what the Baal Shem Tov talks about later. We talked a lot about the Sfirot, 10 attributes of God, right? Chesed, love, din, severity or strictness, Netzach and Hod, which can be translated as striving and stillness, male attributes, female attributes, right? Yesod is male attribute, Malchut is the Shekhinah female attributes. And again, I don't want to go back over that because we spent a lot of time on it about 3 months ago. So the mission is to try to recognize, my thought actually came from a sacred attribute of God. It's a garbled thought. So in other words, I'm going to jump ahead to what the Baal Shem Tov would tell you. I'm going to jump ahead by way of simplifying it. If I had a lustful thought, okay, then we would say, this is actually somehow has its root in the attribute of chesed, love. It's me having that thought rather than, oh darn, I'm distracted. Once I see that it comes from the root of God's attribute of chesed, which remember the psychological aspects, I also have an attribute of chesed or love, then I can appreciate it. Or, that guy walked into shul. I can't stand him because blah, 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 whatever it is. So that's a judgment, okay? And the Baal Shem Tov would say, okay, the root of that thought, you need to recognize the root of that thought comes from din, right? Which is the, what's the other word for din? Chesed and gevura, right? Which is the sphera or the attribute of God, which is the intention with chesed or love. Chesed, love, is expansive, and din is limiting and judgmental. It says, do this, don't do that, right? Which might mean eat this, don't eat that, or it might mean be this way and not be that way, or it might mean, I'm sorry, our time is up because I need to move on to the next patient. Okay, so all kinds of aspects of din, which are necessary in the world. If it were not necessary in the world, then I would love everyone equally, and that wouldn't work, okay? I would love other people's children equally as much as my own children, and that wouldn't really be natural. So din or gevura is what is limiting. We sometimes call it judgment or severity, which I think is a negative spin on it, okay? But let's just think of it as limiting rather than all expansive, okay? So to recognize, my thought, I can't stand that person because of XYZ, is a judgment thought. It comes from the divine root of gevura or din, severity or judgment. I promise we'll get to questions and comments eventually today. And that's a divine attribute. And actually, I also have to make judgments and recognize their limitations. It's distorted when the thought comes into my mind of, I can't stand that guy, okay? Just as analogously, I'm having that lustful thought is a distortion of the attribute of chesed, but it actually has its root in the divine realm or in a sacred place. I'm just going to say this shorthand and I don't have time to expand it. In a psychologized kind of way, this is one of the things that someone might do in therapy, working with a therapist, right? Why do I keep on having that unpleasant feeling or reacting in some inappropriate, dysfunctional way? It's actually a distorted version of something that I need to understand and get in touch with. That would be the secularized, psychologized version in there, okay? There's a grain of sand in that pearl, and I got to get to that grain of sand. That's a bad analogy because the pearl is the nice thing and the grain of sand is the irritant. It's like the opposite. There's a pearl inside that rock, okay? And there's a diamond inside that rock, and I've got to chip away at the rock so that I get to that. So the Baal Shem Tov's thought here is that the distracting thought has within it something sacred, which comes to you as a distortion. Now I'm going to come back to the next to the last line in the text on what's called here page 110, the fourth page in the handout. So if you're able to do this, this isn't a bad thought that's taking me off task, off target spiritually. This is actually a gift to me when I uncover the divine root of that thought. Then the blessed name derives great pleasure from this, for it may be likened to a prince who fell into captivity. When he is returned to the king, the pleasure of the king is greater than it would have been had the prince been with him all the time. I'm going to translate that into our language in terms of prayer. When you are able to uncover the sacred core of that distorted, distracting thought, God is happier with you, as it were, okay, than if you would have stayed on track all the time. Because what you did in the effort you made in your course correction by trying to recognize the good core of the negative distracting thought. Negative doesn't necessarily mean, hatred or negative emotion. It just means not what you're in air quotes supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be saying the Shema and thinking about cleaving to God, but I am worried about something else. What's the core of that worry, that thought? It could be that I love my child and I'm worried about them. It could be that, I'm worried about something in the world that needs to improve. Could think of a zillion examples, okay? It's not a bad thing, the distraction. It's an opportunity for you to delve into what's behind that. And the king, metaphor God, thinks that is better than if you were just a great davener and was straight ahead all the time with no distractions, okay? Because the intrusive thought is a gift. I hope everyone kind of gets that idea. It's potentially a gift if you make use of it correctly, right? If you make use of it correctly, it's a gift. If you don't, it's just a distraction. All right, next page, the paragraph that I highlighted, the second paragraph in 92.1. However, presently in this context, I heard from him, that means the person writing the book heard from the Baal Shem Tov, that the epitome, that the epitome of knowledge is to recognize God in all of the particulars of one's experiences. The epitome of knowledge is to recognize God in all of the particulars of one's experiences, not just when you're loving and spiritual. When you're loving, when you're angry, when you're sad, when you're jealous, try to dig deeper and recognize how this is potentially a distortion of something that comes from God. And in general, not just your experiences, all the occurrences of the world, that all of these originate from him. May God's name be blessed. Although this matter is profound and cannot be fully explicated, or I'll say this another way, I'm going to say it a much deeper way. We talked a little bit about this. This is not the mission of our course, the nature of evil, but we talked a little bit about this. Where does evil come from in the world is one of the big four questions that all religions have to answer. And one of the answers is evil comes from something outside of God. It's an absence of God, okay? That's one strain of Jewish thinking and mystical thinking. Another strain is it's the left side of God. It's somehow a distortion of things that come from God. Is it hard to understand that? Yes, it is. Although this matter is profound and cannot be fully explicated, right? Everything, all the occurrences of the world originate in God. Although this matter is profound and cannot be fully explicated, which is a fancy way of saying, although we don't really understand that, what can be said, albeit merely as a subtle sign, is this. If you find yourself in a state of wealth and honor and abundance, what you might think is, I'm great. But what should you think? Recognize this as a manifestation of the divine attribute of kindness. This is God's chesed, because the human being is an embodied organ of the divine presence. And the entire creation in toto, which is Latin for totally, is the divine body. Okay, we talked about this mystical idea, which is amplified in Chabad, that everything in the universe is connected and is, in fact, the substance, the body of God. That to think that anything is separate from God is an illusion. Paul, don't get distracted. This is deep. I need you. Paul, you're distracted. Okay, you're going to lose the thread. And when one is, heaven forfend, in a state of abjectness and suffering, this derives from the divine attribute of din, or gevura, strict judgment. Therefore, that person should pray from the midst of this attribute. As it is written in Vayikra, Leviticus, Bizot yavo Aharon el HaKodesh. With this shall Aaron enter the holiness, which means whatever your which means in this interpretation, this Kabbalistic interpretation, with whatever your this is at the moment, that's where you need to enter into the holy. Not, it's a bad thought, I got to push that thought away, I got to get back on track and focus and concentrate, and then I'll be holy. Rather, I got this thought, I'm going to put it in air quotes, sent to me. Why? I need to dig into it and see how it leads me back to God. So when you are consistent, last paragraph on the page, so when you are consistently serving God, but then feel that you are presently unable to, know that this too is on account of the divine presence. And this manifestation is called the first or second form of constricted mind. Remember we talked about big mind and little mind, mochin de gadlut and mochin de katnut, expanded consciousness and narrow consciousness. So when you're knocked off course, hey, that's just narrow consciousness. It's also part of God, so that you may know through all of your experiences that all of them are expressions of divinity, next page, and you may develop the understanding of how to recognize the diverse natures of the experiences you are having, so as to be able to unite the particular manifestation of the two, so that you are able to unite, I'm going to change that to connect, the particular manifestations to the higher form of the manifestation. Is it sometimes hard to figure out how to do that? How does this distracting, intrusive thought, how can it actually reconnect me back up to God? Yes, it is challenging to do that. And that is why you have to, over time, develop the understanding of how to recognize the diverse natures of the experiences you are having. Okay? Right? I need to work on figuring out how does this actually connect me to some root in the divine realm. Just to finish this thought up, all of the above is applicable both in general as well as in all detail, so that the perfect person, like if you were great at this, would be able to unite with the divine presence in every step she or he takes, and through everything such a one does, even in physical acts such as eating or in business dealings. In all of them, one is able to unify with God's presence and recognize the divine origin of one's occurrences in a particular way. Okay, so what that means is, and then I don't know that we need to read the rest. Here we go. When the individual returns to God, he or she lifts in 94. He or she lifts up all of those holy sparks that were given to the outside forces. Therefore, when one is praying or studying Torah, distracting thoughts arise to confound him or her, because these thoughts are produced as a result of one earlier transgressions. Let's just call it's a distortion, and they stand in opposition to the person, as in battle. This goes back to they're trying to block you from getting to where you get. But the true intention is that the person rectify them and take them out of the state of obscuration, meaning make them undistorted. This is achieved when one invokes a sense of dread upon realizing that these thoughts are the product of one's own sins, I'm going to call it one's own distortions, and feels contrite on their account. Okay. I'm going to summarize this in simpler language. I'm going to unshare. When you're trying to be spiritual, we're talking about prayer. The passage talks about prayer or study. And you have distracting thoughts. The superficial response is to say, oh, darn, I got off task. The deeper response, says the Baal Shem Tov, is to recognize the piece or core of the divine attribute. By the way, it's God's attribute as well as your attribute of chesed or din or striving or stillness or male sexuality or female sexuality or balance and harmony, whatever it is, recognize the divine root of that as well as your human root of that, and have that be a vehicle for you to, as it were, appreciate the intrusive thought. If you can't, then the analogy, the metaphor is, it's as if there were forces that opposed you. You were trying to enter into the palace, and there was some palace guard that was kicking you out. There are other passages in the Baal Shem Tov when they say this a lot. There are a lot of rings of protection around the monarch, and these rings of protection will try to keep you out, okay? And you have to have correct, I will call it, mindfulness to outwit those forces that are trying to keep you out. Or, take it to prayer, you need to have, it's a certain, I don't want to say jujitsu, actually, because jujitsu is a redirecting of the force. It's a recognizing of the good, useful, divine core of that thought, and then that thought actually brings you closer to God rather than being a distraction. It was sent to you, superficially it comes to you in a form which is it is a distortion of a divine attribute. The distortion can be, I'm afraid, I hate, I lust, I'm angry about whatever, all the things that flit through our mind. Where did I read this? Oh, the Piazetzner, who's another Hasidic master, says, if a person actually wrote down every part of their stream of consciousness of the day, every single thing, every single half thought or word that flits through your head, and you read it, you would seem like a crazy person. That's what the Piazetzner, later 20th century Hasidic master, says, okay? Because we have this tumbling kaleidoscope of thoughts and feelings. So what the Baal Shem Tov is saying is, some of them are actually the things that you think of as obstacles to deeper spirituality. Figure out what is actually the sacred divine core in that actually is the trail of breadcrumbs that leads you back to God, rather the thing that you think is blocking you from getting closer to God. Okay, I'm going to pause. That's basically what Hasidut says about distractions, okay? If you treat it as a distraction, you're missing the point. You have to treat it as an opportunity to reconnect you with something in the divine realm. There's some divine core in that. We can think of it as one, elsewhere he talks about it a lot as the 10 sfirot. What sfirah, which of the 10 attributes of God is the core of this thought that it's coming from? Okay, I'm going to pause and allow a short amount of time for questions or comments, a couple of minutes. I said a lot.
Okay, I expected to see at least a little practical stuff.
Okay.
Like, don't schmooze with your neighbor while you're down.
No. It's all about your own internal process, this stuff. By the way, it assumes that you know the halakha, so that you know that you're not supposed to schmooze with your neighbor. It's like, Larry saying the iPhone, like, no. There's no remedy for, like, the obvious things that everyone's supposed to know. It's for the things that we have trouble controlling, which is our own internal stream of consciousness. I think that's what they would say. Go ahead, Carl. You were hoping for more. Yeah.
The practical stuff is assumed to be taken care of, or
exactly.
Obvious, so
right. The practical stuff is, Carl, stop talking. That's the practical stuff. That part is easy, right? Carl, stop thinking about that. Is much harder, is what the Baal Shem Tov is saying. Oh, that's so much harder. Bernie.
There's a neurosurgeon I worked with when I was very young, told me if any of us knew everything else about any other person, it would boggle your mind.
Correct.
I mean, not only their thoughts, but particularly their actions.
Right. Yeah.
And right. That's sort of the same theory.
Yeah. Sort of. I'm now struggling to read for the third time in my life. This time I think I'm going to complete it. Ulysses by James Joyce, which was supposedly like the first stream of consciousness novel or something like that. And I got up to I think it's chapter 3, and I'm listening to lectures and reading a book about it so that I can understand. And the lecture says, chapter 3, this is where everyone gives up, because it's the stream of consciousness, right? Because what Joyce is trying to do, this is what the guy says in the lecture, is he's trying to actually put down to paper the jumble of half thoughts and half sentences and words that actually tumble through all of our minds all day long, which if you actually saw it all transcribed is just meandering and I don't want to say crazy, but all over the place and hard to comprehend. Okay.
Yeah,
and the Baal Shem Tov is saying that's what's going to happen to you when you're davening. Don't think I'm a bad davener. I got to stop thinking these thoughts. Think, can I figure out the divine root that this thought came from? Because then that helps me. I'm going to go back to Luria terms, the Ari. That helps me liberate the spark of light from the vessel, right? Or it helps me see the divine core and the schmutz falls away. Pause. Any other comments or thoughts about that? Could people like nod and say to me, nod if you basically understand the idea? Because if you don't understand the idea, I want you to ask about it. Okay. The idea is basically I have this random thought and I've got to liberate the core in it as opposed to, just stop thinking about that. Because of course, the more you say stop thinking about that, the more you're going to think about that. Okay. I'm going to pause for now. Let it digest. By the way, I encourage you to try this. Okay. Some combination of spirituality and therapy when you're davening, when there's a thought that takes you off course, say, good morning, dog. I'm going to say it this way. What is the deeper root of this thought? Is it, I don't know. I don't want to make a list. Okay. But I want you to try move beyond like, I'm jealous, I'm angry, I'm scared, I'm whatever, and say, okay, what's the core thought in that? Which could be, again, in secular modern terms, it could be a core psychological need based on your own personal life story and history. But of course, Jewish mysticism says that core psychological need is somehow linked to some aspect of God. Okay. And that takes us back to the 10 Sfirot, which are the 10 attributes of God, which are really meant to explain kind of all feelings and experiences in the universe, the psychological aspects of the 10 Sfirot. So I'd encourage people to go either, go back and find that class, or frankly, just go to Wikipedia, and look up 10 Sfirot and you'll find enough to take you back to that. Okay. Going to ring off. Be Torah. I will not see you next week. God willing, we'll meet in 2 weeks and we'll talk some more about Hasidism and prayer. And we're coming to the end of Hasidism, and then we're going to get to modernity.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.